Labor, meanwhile, has pledged a vote on voluntary assisted dying laws within months if it wins the state election. The LNP's platform does not support assisted dying for terminally ill patients, but the issue has vexed the party. The move would follow Victoria, which became the first state to allow assisted dying in 2017. Joining me live now is Resources Minister and Queenslander Keith Pitt. Thanks very much for your time. So what are your thoughts on this, first of all? Legislation by February, if Labor wins, was the pledge from Annastacia Palaszczuk.
Oh, Tom, great to be with you, great to be with your viewers. But once again, I mean, this is an opportunity for the Queensland people to have their say. I mean, this is what democracy is about. There's some very clear policy differentials between the LNP and the ALP in Queensland. And Premier Palaszczuk, for all the huff and bluff, worst unemployment rate in the country, closed borders continuously, which I know is very, very popular, but it certainly affects the amount of jobs that are available and whether business can get back to work. And Tom, I just want to make one point about Victoria very briefly. It's also affecting the rest of the country. I've got a local caravan sales business. They do repairs, they do maintenance. They simply can't get stock. They've had a terrible quarter, even though they're overrun with customers because their manufacturers are out of Melbourne. So no supply means no sales, means no jobs. I think that's a very difficult position for them.
Quite the pivot, though. Does this mean the LNP doesn't want to talk about assisted dying legislation?
Well, as Deb Frecklington has said, there'll be a conscience vote, assuming that the ALP, which is a pretty big assumption, Tom, that they're going to win the election. We know Premier Palaszczuk will be all over those social issues, but not on the tough issues around the economy, about driving jobs, about providing opportunity. I mean, that's what we're doing at a federal level. That's what a Queensland Liberal National Party government would do at a state level. And I've got to tell you, to the people of Queensland, give us someone we can work with. I mean, Premier Palaszczuk and her ministry have been incredibly difficult to get on with in terms of delivering federally funded projects. No greater example of that than Section D of the Bruce Highway, announced by us in 2016, funded by us for 80%, and the ALP turned aside about 3 weeks ago. So I just think that's appalling. There's jobs to be had there. It's about road safety and the delivery of infrastructure projects.
Well, just on that, Deb Frecklington made an announcement on even more money for the Bruce, which was continued on federal funding, but Michael McCormack said, well, we've committed all the money we're going to on that. So there seems to be a shortfall on the federal side, according to what Deb Frecklington wants in the future.
Oh, look, I think Deb's announcement is a very positive one. Over a period of 15 years, they want to dual lane the Bruce Highway top to bottom. Tom, it is one of those roads.
But they want more money from your government.
Well, all states want more money from the federal government. We committed $10 billion in 2013. We're getting on with those projects. But as the Deputy Prime Minister has said...
That's it, isn't it? And they want more than that.
Oh, no, it's not what I'm saying at all. As the Deputy Prime Minister has said, if Ms Frecklington and the LNP is successful, we're very happy to talk to them about infrastructure projects in Queensland, including the Bruce, and their plan to dual lane
But
talk
talk to them is different to sure, here's the money.
Well, we've just had a budget. They're currently not in government. I'm very hopeful that they'll have a success on the 31st of October. I'll certainly be fighting for more money for the Bruce, Tom. There's no doubt about that whatsoever.
CFMEU's written a letter to you saying the relationship with China could cost coal jobs. It highlights some particularly outspoken backbench MPs, namely Eric Abetz, George Christensen. Have their comments been unhelpful?
Well, firstly, there's no stronger advocate for the coal industry than George Christensen. Look, Tony Maher actually get on with reasonably well, and we certainly worked closely through the pandemic in the early stages to ensure the resources sector continued to operate. But I mean, it's only a couple of weeks ago, Tom, that the CFMEU were bailing out on Labor. They weren't going to support them in Queensland because of New Auckland and Premier Palaszczuk's failure to make a decision about what's happening at that mine. I mean, the Premier pushed that off to a court decision which was allegedly going to be decided in a week. Well, that's never happened. There are real jobs to be had there. So I'd say to the CFMEU, get yourself back in the fight, stand up for those people that work in the resources sector and in particular coal. There's no greater opportunity than New Auckland, but of course I'll respond to Tony and the CFMEU. But once again, Tom, it's horses for courses. I want to see them get on board.
Matt Canavan says, well, if this happens with China, fine, we'll just build more power stations here, coal-fired power stations. Even if that's accurate, that doesn't replace that market, does it?
Well, look, I don't think there's any way that we can build enough coal-fired power stations in Australia to utilise everything that we're currently exporting. But once again, if we look at China's actual consumption, it's over 3 billion tonne of both met coal and thermal coal. Australia's export markets in terms of the total in coal exports. It's a bit over 20% into China. That market changes. 90% of what happens in China is provided by them through their domestic mining operations and across to Mongolia. So, of course, it fluctuates. There's only 10% of the total market that the rest of the world provides.
All right. And just finally, we're nearly out of time, but a bit of talk about this PEP 11 licence. It allows offshore oil and gas drilling and exploration from Sydney, from Manly there up to Newcastle. A couple of your Liberal colleagues say, let's not renew this. You're set to ignore their plea. Is that accurate?
Well, Tom, on our side of politics, you don't get thrown out of the party and disendorsed because you've got a view. Of course they've got a view. I mean, they're representing their constituents. My job as the Resources Minister is to make decisions based on, firstly, the recommendations, the very strong regulatory provisions which we have in our offshore oil and gas, and I'm a joint decision maker with New South Wales in the case of PEP 11. Now, at the moment, the New South Wales government hasn't put that project forward in terms of the permit. I'll look at it very closely if they do, but that will be done based on what's recommended to me by the regulator and, of course, those decisions based around Australia's regulatory framework.